And don't worry, I'm going to do my thing right now. You can tell I'm probably a little bit sick, but here's Panel 1 Breakdown Brave New World from the perspective of a geospatial engineer. Hello YouTubers, this is the noobifier. I just returned from Manchester. I'm a little bit jet lagged and I wanted to get the very important breakdowns out to you for CitizenCon 2024. It's important to me that you, my viewers, get the info in this format. If you're a regular here, thank you for the support and thank you for your patience. Please link my content to new citizens that may not yet know about it. That helps me a lot more than you think. If you're a new citizen, welcome. I make what is known as no bullshit content. I hope you enjoy the format and decide to subscribe. I will always fight to keep you fully up to date on Star Citizen development in this short format. We begin on day 1, panel 1, Brave New Worlds. The Brave New Worlds section was further broken down into other sections, each hosted by a team lead. First up on deck was Monsieur Benoit Beausejour, who's the Chief Technology Officer at CIG. He's a fellow Canadian and works at Montreal within Turbulent Studios. Benoit first spoke about the history of planet tech and how meshing would allow the needed large number of points of interest. Life to lifelessness, but procedurally generated, complete biomes with flora and fauna. Outposts and points of interest are currently hand-designed and hand-placed, but this is completely unable to satisfy the variation and quantity that is required. With outposts and installations, they would need to be procedural. This updated total world building tool is called the Genesis system, which is a nice callback to Star Trek. The base layer or surface is first, and it's generated based on a wide range of feature data points. We would call these metadata, which is a fancy way of saying data about data. The laws of natural creation is the data-driven system that's held together by rules and hierarchy. Based on my 15 years experience as a geospatial engineer, I've interpreted this in the most simple form for you, but I've added a little bit more information where necessary. CIG has researched and then created a detailed set of topology rules that will take numerous needed categories and use this to define the surface configuration of a world automatically. In the real world, this would be your topology layer, your soils value layer, your water level, your plasticity, trafficability, surface composition. This has been called procedurally generated planet tech in the past, but that name has been replaced by Genesis, which is next, and an even more powerful tool set, as you will come to see. Genesis takes into consideration many more values and has a much more rigorous output, resulting in an even better final planet. This planet mimics reality better, above and below the surface. The system can and will choose surface category, surface configuration, water type, and others based on location, slope, altitude, and elevation. The system will choose the correct biome for the location based on the type of planet that would be in that system, which varies based on how close or far it might be from a star, its orbital distance, and the planet tilt. Some of our planets in Star Citizen solar system have been impacted by war or industry, and these would receive special treatment and special data values. This is space after all, so there is no reason for everything to mimic what we have seen on Earth. It's sci-fi. We want variation. We want craziness. Proximity to the star would change everything. Venus, Earth, and Mars, for example, are all unique based on these factors. Also, with the soil composition, what makes up the mass. And with Genesis, so will the planets in our simulated solar system. They continue to explain that not only the surface, but the subsurface dressing was automated, and that has ramifications for trafficability, industry, harvesting, farming, and wildlife. The legacy planet tech systems were dictated by only a handful of rules when compared to Genesis. So now when geology type, soil depth, soil quality, etc. are added, you can see how this supports all of the activities that us citizens plan to do better. And remember, the point is automation. We expect a wide variation of planets and locations to explore at a scale that is simply unable to be achieved unless it's automated. The system has been improved to blend the transitions more seamlessly, which is a task that was also done manually in the past by a programmer. Bedrock, soil cover, and snow are the main parts that define the surface, but also tracking the vitality plus other factors. The system will not just place trees, but place trees where the trees would naturally want to be based on the parameters that the developer set for the tree. Which is just good, so cool. And this is how they described it, and then they went into further detail. Genesis would produce grasses in an open area of fertile ground. Genesis would produce a swamp, a forest, a desert, or tundra if it was appropriate based on the data, based on where the system thinks is best for that feature. A very cold location won't support vegetation well, and this will be naturally snow-covered. And this doesn't mean that there's no life, but it will further limit the type of life and the type of activities that this place would support. Rich soils, high moisture, with lots of sunlight would result in trees being placed, and the size and vitality of the resulting forest would change based on how suitable the location is and how suitable the location continues to be. The system has a robust calculation to faithfully blend the transition space between areas, and I'm only lightly scratching the surface of this topic with a simple set of examples. Genesis, or a system with the detail and rigor of Genesis, is the only way that we would have the quality and volume of locations for the universe. The legacy planets and moons were procedurally made to a point, but then were crafted and polished manually, extremely time-consuming. Later in this presentation, they explained how Genesis also was aware of reputation, factions, law and lawlessness, corporate ownership. With these data points, they could also factor how to populate thousands of points of interest automatically. Genesis might decide to build a settlement, a small farm, a raider chop shop, or a trade post. Who lived there, the condition of the location, and the types of activity are baked in based on the data, and they promised more information later in the presentation. Placing and deciding upon the types of trees in a location is based on the dominance in several categories. Some trees, such as ferns, are less dominant than, let's say, a redwood in a very bright sunlight condition. That doesn't mean that the ferns are going to be missing from anywhere that there's redwood, it's just that the redwood in the area that's suitable for the redwood would be dominant, and vice versa if the situation changes. In that same area, a factor such as soil quality might favor the fern instead, making it more dominant, with the expected results. Genesis will populate this, and the team then reminded us of scope, scale of populating a planet, but it has to be believable in density. So they addressed that too with some optimization, and some of the demos were really crazy. By maintaining a growing library of assets, each with preference and dominance, Genesis will build and continue to iterate upon our highly detailed worlds with an appropriate surface configuration, again, automatically. Spend 10 years building a tool, and then it can build you thousands of worlds at the push of a button. At a planetary scale, you're going to get diversity in biomes, not because someone painted it that way, but because the total topology solution makes it so. Trees, rocks, hydrology, soil type, and configuration are placed and then blended. I have purposely allocated a little bit more detail in describing the first panel of day 1 than I would normally do in a summary format, because this is something that I'm extremely familiar with and the information is quite important. We continue with the next stage. Soil type and quality have ramifications for suitability of agriculture and other factors. What is planted will be chosen based on what is there above and below the surface. They went on to discuss rock density and frequency, which, with all of the ramifications that would have for mining and other forms of resource gathering, type, quantity, and quality of the material and the mineral is selected the same way to coincide with the area. Historically, people began to know where to look for gold because of the situation. The situation mimicked another place that they knew gold was there. So not only do you have your sensor, but as you're going and flying over, you can say, that is where I might find aluminum, and it looks like it'll be good quality. These topology rules also work for wildlife in the air, on the surface, in the water. All of these become more than just a set of dressings, and they become a huge part of the story. With better control over cliffs and slopes, Genesis will change where and how what will be placed. Trees also have more metadata, an age data field, which will dictate size based on the state of growth, but it'll also have a quality asset based on their life cycle. Watering is rain, and rain is part of the weather, which is the next subject. Weather is simulated and modeled on a global scale, but rather than being scripted by some narrative team, the weather that we see is driven by all of the underlying factors. We will see more rain in a rainforest, not just because it's a rainforest, but because of the set of circumstances in that location which favor rain. So it becomes a rainforest. The rain, soil, and factors are why that forest is there. The weather over a desert is why the location has different vegetation, and then this is based on where it is on the planet, where the planet is around its orbit of the star. The clouds, the day-night cycles, the winds, and even storms exist because of the data and the rules. We were shown many examples before and after which highlighted better fidelity from orbit all the way down to the player on their belly on the ground in the prone. The resulting planet stands up to close scrutiny and looks great at any distance. Historically, tiling results in visual lines on the texture surface when viewed from a distance. Genesis is able to place and blend better to achieve zero visual striping and zero lines. The planet content team was next. The planet content is the subcomponent that drives what's being placed where that I spoke about earlier. The developers demonstrated some examples of what happens in a higher moisture area, When the title Swamps was posted on the main screen, the entire hall erupted in a cheer. This segment demonstrated the newest addition to the library. The swamp needs land and waterborne foliage, which is now built into the library. We were shown examples of these assets at various sizes and states of development. We were then reminded that Genesis would know how to place them automatically. Procedural size, type, and density once again. Water injection was next. Water injection is how water interacts with the player, the wind, and even the wake of a passing vehicle. To demonstrate this, we were shown a video clip of a set of logs floating in the water, which was already great, and then a player walked and pushed through them, and the logs were pushed aside in a realistic manner with realistic ripples being formed around the player, and all of this was just built into the engine. We were shown how a new set of assets was needed to create a convincing jungle area, and then we were shown the work that was done to create the redwood forest biome. This would occur naturally anywhere where there was less humidity and heat compared to the jungle. The redwood will grow dense and tall, light shines through the canopy, and of course, the developers paid homage to Star Wars. As part of this demo, we had hover bikes speeding between the trees over thick ground cover and grass. The only thing missing was hip-sized teddy bears saying yub yub. They said they have unified how all of the foliage assets react with wind, the player's jet wash, which will be rendered on the GPU instead to balance the load. Location density was the next subject. Where people live and what they live in is part of the Genesis process. Legacy handcrafted assets are time-consuming to make and place. Of course, they lack the quantity and variation needed to support higher player counts. With the goal of having many POIs for us to explore at intervals of approximately 100 kilometers across the surface, that has to be automated. Legacy planets have about 10 permanent. Genesis will place thousands per planet. POI locations will be selected based on the area, similar to how soil, vegetation, and hydrology are. Genesis will consider local resources, law, and factions, so in a location rich in resources with a corporate-controlled area, you'll likely have a corporate outpost with good security, and it's kept in a good state of upkeep. That location might make sense to have a refinery nearby, which will need to be close to water on level ground in a clearing. Further, you might need a small farm, and the crop that's being cultivated would be based on what the soil can support at the location. When placing the same location with the same set of parameters but in Pyro, that would be tweaked to suit the unique changes. The NPCs and services available at that new location would feel appropriate to the location, and of course, based on your reputation, you may not even be welcome. Clusters of these assets make up larger locations, and clusters of clusters make up what is being called a sector. A sector can be made up of over 100 locations, and of course, at a planetary scale, there would be an average of around 3,000 locations. A system with 5 planets might have 15,000 points of interest to support you, your org, and for you to explore. So armed with this new information, it's no wonder why the developers have been working to automate the process at the Fidelity rather than just building it. Francesco was next to discuss how the topology can influence how items are being placed, but also how the updated day-night cycles will be implemented. He would also touch slightly on player-created locations in some detail, but based on homesteads and stations, that's actually a topic that's covered on day 2. Locations need to be populated and come to life. NPCs now operate based on a much more detailed set of parameters. What can be perceived by the NPC is based on light, sound, and cover. When it's dark, the NPC is less likely to understand what's going on. They may choose to activate their flashlight or turn on a light, an outdoor light, to improve this. Some NPCs may have a pet as a companion on patrol, resulting in an overall augmented awareness based on the pet's senses and their ability to see better in the dark. Emergent cover was the next topic, and this is fully modeled, where the NPC won't only see with a field of view, but will also understand the objects that are being seen. And this is the backbone which will allow the NPC to more realistically offer resistance. Boulders, walls, and other fixed items are all seen as valid objects to be used as cover, but also there are movable objects such as a rover or a buggy. Those can be identified as well and can be used. Moving a vehicle into an area will change how the NPCs might move. And then during the demonstration, we were shown how Maelstrom allows for the destruction of cover. Destroying a wall with a grenade or with sustained gunfire drastically changes the cover and how the NPC evaluates the total available cover options within an area. Phase Phase 4 of this panel covers how light is being coded. Light sources, fog, dust, and particles all have a direct influence on how things look. Using ray tracing tech, the visual quality and ambience is being improved while being more economical on the system resources. The remainder of this panel on day 1 spoke about managing system resources while achieving the best looking shine, reflection, and light within a scene. Through various demos, we could see before and after improvements of the new tech. Then we were on to sound and how it's managed in the game, being a part of the player immersion. Like light, sound interacts and bounces off of objects. So then they have Star Audio. Star Audio is able to produce and propagate how the player hears within the game. They've modeled the Doppler effect in-game, which is a pitch shift based on location and speed of the object. Weapon sounds would be completely different from the shooter or the target's perspective. They demoed how a target would hear incoming sniper fire. That's the zip-snap sound that the round comes with as the target is killed, and shortly after, you can hear the shot based on the distance, which won't help the target at all because the target is already dead, but at least the rest of the crew can hear and then scatter for cover. They demoed this with several huge explosions from various distances. Shockwaves and sounds will vary based on air temperature and atmospheric pressure. Then we were treated to a segment that had to do with the weather. Weather is also being fully modeled, as I said, within Genesis, and this is also procedurally generated. We were shown a demo where the clouds evolved naturally and then grew based on an incoming storm. The storm occurs not because of an artificial trigger, but because the conditions at that location were correct to create a storm. After becoming darker, the wind increased, the temperature dropped, and then as the weather front finally arrived, wetting everything down while reducing the player's sight distances, this particular outpost started to sway in the wind, but it was more than just the looks of the storm. Things were being hit by lightning and destroyed. The weather directly impacted flight as the player attempted to get into orbit. The reduced temperature impacted the suit and presented the player with a more difficult situation. Taking off with reduced visibility, high wind, was very cool to see on the screen, but the situation took a turn for the worse when one of the ships was struck in midair by lightning, resulting in what we would assume was a fatal crash. They summarized the 5 panels with a nice outro explaining how this dynamic system will allow them to populate full-scale planets brought to life with people, creatures, and locations. Genesis is the set of tools that will procedurally generate worlds in Star Citizen at the highest quality quickly. And this concludes my summary of the first panel from CitizenCon 2024. I was there in person, which is why there was a delay, so sorry for that. Please stay tuned and watch out for other panels being published here very soon. Thank you for your support by watching and sharing the content. Please and thank you. Fly safe.